We're honored tonight to host Adam Szymczyk, the artistic director of Documental 14, who will talk about his unique experience in directing the 2017 Documental 14 and the concept behind organizing it in two cities, Athens and Kassel, for the first time. He will also be in conversation with Palestinian artist Ahlam Shibli, whose work Occupation was exhibited at Documental 14 and is now showing here in this hall in our 30th anniversary, third and closing exhibition. In November 2013, Adam Szymczyk was chosen by an international committee of 8 experts to be the artistic head of the 14th Documenتا in Kassel. Adam is an art critic and curator. In 1997, he co-founded the Foxel Gallery Foundation. From 2003 to 2014, he was the director of the Kunsthalle Basel. In 2008, he co-curated the 5th Berlin Biennial for Contemporary Art. In addition, he's a member of the board of the Warsaw Museum of Modern Art. In 2011, he was awarded the Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement, sponsored by the Menel Foundation in Houston. Adam was called by the New York Times a superstar among curators. Ahlam Shibli is a Palestinian artist. Through a documentary aesthetics, Ahlam Shibli's photographic work addresses the contradictory implications of the notion of home. It deals with the loss of home and the fight against that loss, but also with restrictions and limitations that the idea of home imposes on individuals and communities marked by repressive identity politics. Shibli's work has been presented in solo and group exhibitions at many international institutions, such as MAGBA in Barcelona, Jeux de Paume in Paris, 2 times at Documenتا, and several times at Darat al-Funun. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to Adam and Ahlam. Adam, I give you the floor now.
Thank you very much for coming to the talk. And first, I would like to thank my hosts, Darat al-Funun Foundation, and Suha Shaman for the invitation, and to Loma Hamdan for hospitality, and to Suha as well for hospitality, as well to all those who helped to set up this talk, which will be divided into 2 parts, after which we will take questions from the audience. The first part, I'll try to give you a brief idea of what Documenتا 14, which is now a year ago when it ended, was. And in the second part, we are going to try to delve into the work of Ahlam Shibli, taking this relatively new work, Occupation, as a starting point, and then maybe talking about some more specific ideas behind her practice, which is within the medium of photography, but also involving other genres in it. So, since Ahlam was part of Documenتا 14, I think this would be a good way of going from a more general framework of a large international exhibition into the specific practice of an artist who responded to the invitation to participate in the show. So as Loma Hamdan said before, I started to work on Documenتا 14 in the year 2013, and the initial invitation from Kassel came to present a proposal to the international jury, so I had to invent a good proposal. And my first reaction, being invited to develop an idea for the city of Kassel, was that I didn't feel comfortable thinking about an exhibition that would be only located in Kassel, Germany, and that would happen in the year 2017. I needed a sort of friction at the start, perhaps to respond to our time, which I think is, as we all know, also full of this sort of tensions that very often have to do with places and how these places relate to each other. So, in other words, I thought of what if Dokumenta happened not in Kassel? What if it started somewhere else? And then came the idea of Athens for a very particular reason. But before telling you why exactly Athens and why in 2013, a little bit of a historical account of Dokumenta. It is an exhibition which is in the meantime an institution in Germany, and it was established in the year 1955 by Arnold Bode, who was in the first place an artist, who already in the late 1920s and early 30s worked on several exhibitions in the city of Kassel, where he was coming from. So he helped to organize exhibitions. So he was a kind of prototype of a curator, perhaps already before the Second World War, being involved in organization of exhibitions with mostly local artists. And at the same time, he had his own artistic practice as a painter, and in the 1930s, the Nazis basically banned his work, as the work of many other contemporary artists at that time. He lost his studio, and he was not making art for quite a long time. Then he was drafted into Wehrmacht, into the German army, and he was sent to the front line in France. He survived the war, returned to Kassel, and in the meantime, Kassel was a city that was quite completely destroyed by several carpet bombings of the Allies. And these carpet bombings happened in Kassel because it was a city where weapons were produced, so tanks and so forth. There were several companies in Kassel that were working exclusively for the military industry, especially during the Second World War, and therefore Kassel was a target of these bombings, which destroyed the city almost completely, and with the city also its libraries, museums, and so forth. So it was a landscape of destruction, and the inspiration for organizing an exhibition in half-ruined city came perhaps from a visit that Arnold Bode, the founder of Dokumenta, paid to an exhibition that featured a famous work by Pablo Picasso, the Guernica, in Palazzo Reale in Milano, in Italy. So Guernica was shown against the backdrop of a completely ruined location. So the subject matter of the work being the bombing of the Spanish town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War by the German Legion Condor, was juxtaposed with the location, which itself was a ruin, this time of the Second World War. So somehow this way of staging of an artwork in a ruin had some influence on the idea of organizing the first edition of Dokumenta in 1955 in the central location, which was the Museum Fridericiano, that was completely burnt out during the war. And with some effort, it was possible to convert it into an exhibition venue, and it became like kind of central place of the show. So to make the long story short, since 1955, Dokumenta had 13 editions, which were mostly located in Kassel. Yet, since 2002, there were attempts by several curators to sort of dislocate the Dokumenta in such a way that, for instance, some of the preliminary events, such as conferences, would take place on other locations in Okwien Vezor's Dokumenta 11 in the year 2002, up to the locations that preceded, up to the iteration of Dokumenta that preceded my edition of Dokumenta, organized by Caroline Krzysztof Bakardziev, who made a satellite project of Dokumenta in Kabul, which is a city that was at that time completely torn by the war, in the year 2013. But I didn't want to organize a satellite exhibition to Dokumenta. I wanted to properly divide and displace the exhibition, to take it away for a long journey from what is its symbolic and actual home, Kassel, and therefore I proposed to organize it in Athens first. So Dokumenta 14 had two parts, or as I prefer to call them, two acts. The first one from April to July 2017 was taking place in Athens, and the second part, which is a bit strange to say, the second part taking place in Kassel, because Kassel is this symbolic historical locus of Dokumenta, the proper home of the exhibition. So this division of the exhibition into two acts was introduced quite early on in the process. It was introduced publicly. I spoke about it from the early 2014, and it met some resistance in Kassel. The citizens were, and the critics and others were afraid that in this way Kassel will lose the importance of being the home of Dokumenta, and of course to that came the reputation of Greece at that time, which was one of the primary reasons why I proposed to organize the exhibition in Athens, because Greece, as you know, was one of the first countries that fell to the financial crisis, which started in the year 2008 with a crisis on the American subprime market and the subsequent crisis in the real estate market in the US, and then this crisis radiated into Europe, and the weakest link in Europe was Greece, which completely collapsed financially. So this collapse meant also the major destruction wrought onto several institutions, cultural institutions in Athens and elsewhere in Greece. The whole public sphere, the social bonds related, sort of imploded under the weight of financial crisis. So when we proposed to organize an edition of Dokumenta in Athens, we first chose to work with several public institutions in this city in order to lend them some strength through the fact that they could participate in the making of this exhibition. We did not work so much with private sponsors or with international organizations supporting art, but we tried to realize the exhibition beginning to work with weak but very important institutions that were still present in Athens at that time. And among those institutions was the one in which Ahlam eventually showed this work, of which one photograph you see behind me, the occupation, which was originally presented at the EMST, which is the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens. This museum has not properly opened so far, and there has been a discussion for at least 15 years, subsequent changes of directors of the museum, changes in political power, ministers of culture changing, and the whole knot of problems which were impossible to resolve, that basically led to a complete obstruction, and the fact that the huge building, around 4,500 square meters of exhibition space, located in the former brewery constructed in the 1950s by one of the foremost modernist architects of Greece, Takis Zenetos, that this building could not open. So basically through the Dokumenta 14 in Athens, we were able to, for the first time, show the full capacity of this exhibition space to the Athenian, Greek, and international audience. And this is where the work of Ahlam occupation, which you now see here, was shown in the Dokumenta. Now, to tell you a little bit more about the exhibition and its different facets, first of all, maybe the page on which you land when you Google Dokumenta 14 is this page with a sign that to me has quite many meanings. The sign which disappears once you move an arrow on the page. So it's just there for a few seconds, this line. And this line is actually a Google Maps route connecting the city of Kassel with the city of Athens, but it also looks like a crack, or it looks like a demonstration of the development in the stock exchange market plunging, and it looks like many other things. It looks like a kind of line that perhaps divides or perhaps connects. So there's a kind of ambiguity of the sign. And why this connection? It is related to a work of two Scottish artists, Ross Birrell and David Harding, who proposed for Dokumenta 14 taking place in Athens and then Kassel to organize a long-distance horse ride between the two cities. Taking on a historical horse ride from the 1920s and the early 1930s that went from the south to the North America, from Buenos Aires to New York by a Swiss long-distance rider called Szybli. So taking this original historical long-distance horse ride as a model, Harding and Birrell proposed to organize a ride that would connect the two cities. So in a way, the work was not material at all in the exhibition. There was just a departure from the city of Athens with the 4 horse riders, and then around 100 days of ongoing ride before the riders arrived in the city of Kassel at some point during the exhibition, and they were celebrated as those who arrived and those who survived in a way. So there were few works. Each artist was invited to Dokumenta 14 with an idea of visiting Athens first. So I suppose that for those invited, it introduced a certain dissonance or a kind of it went kind of against the expectations that when you were invited to Dokumenta, you're supposed to come to Kassel, the city that you might have visited before, and you know what Dokumenta is about and so forth. And here it's stated bluntly in the letter, welcome to Dokumenta 14. We are very pleased to invite you to participate, and please come to Athens. You know, so there is kind of moment which I think for many artists was already at the start introducing quite unusual condition. And as I said, I was very keen on capturing this condition of original displacement, if one may say so, because usually the notion of origins, the notion of roots, the notions of belonging are very much related to places, actual places, or those places that we long for, or places we imagine. In this case, the displacement was introduced right at the start, so come to Dokumenta, visit Athens. First visit always took place in Athens, and I remember the day when Ahlam came to Athens. We were in a very beautiful park in front of a building which was maybe less beautiful than it looked like, because it was a building of former military barracks from the 19th century, which during the rule of the junta in Greece between the year 1967 and 1974 was a place of detention and torture of mostly left-wing activists and suspects who were apprehended by the junta, detained, and in many cases also tortured in this place. And in order to make peace with this history, or to jump over it, the Greek state, after the junta ended, established a municipal gallery exactly in those buildings, turning them effectively into something like a white cube, so to say, erasing any trace of this terrible recent history from the materiality of the building, and hoping that in this way also the historical memory would be erased. So we used this building as a seat of public programs of Dokumenta 14 in Athens, which were organized by a philosopher and activist, a Spanish transgender writer, Paul B. Preciado, under the title The Parliament of Bodies. Maybe it is good to say something why we decided to, in a way, replace the notion of public programs, which is usually something that is attached to the exhibition, that comments on the exhibition, that explains the exhibition, that in many ways follows the exhibition with something more active, such as Parliament of Bodies. So Parliament of Bodies is a direct response to deficiencies of democracy, which doesn't, it is not meant to say that democracy is wrong. It is meant to say that what we are experiencing now is a serious crisis of democracy in many different countries in the West, East, North, South, that shows more and more. In 2013, 2014, we could see many signs showing that we are going to go through pretty hard times for the idea of democracy, and therefore Parliament of Bodies was about bringing kind of basic idea of democratic participation into the core of the exhibition. So instead of democracy that is based on the gathering of elected representatives of a society, we created a kind of proto-democratic situation of the speaking, performing, acting bodies, which are the participants who were not chosen or qualified to participate, but they could come to the parliament from all over the place and participate in several sessions of the parliament that started already around half a year before the exhibition opened in Athens, as a sort of preparation of the exhibition, but also something that rather gives direction to exhibition, then learns from exhibition and reports on it. So at that point in September 2016, we did not yet know which shape exactly the exhibition in Athens will take, and we even had not confirmed at that time the venues of the exhibition. This largest venue, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens, we were sure that we can use it for the exhibition only about 2 months before it opens. So it was quite a crazy planning based on many assumptions with very uncertain outcome. In the end, to some degree, it did work out. Here, under this general what I called working title for the show, because the show was Documentation 14 and it had a working title, Learning from Athens. The working title, not a title, because I thought it would not be reasonable to predetermine the course of the exhibition. So I wanted to insert a kind of verb and kind of process in the provisional name, in the working title of the show, and that's why the idea of learning, which is a kind of two-way process. It's not teaching someone something, but it's an open-ended two-way process of learning, kind of mutual learning, and not only between Athens and Kassel, and not only organized along those polarities that normally organize the public discourse, but a kind of process that is open, that radiates. So under this general header of learning from Athens, we have several parts of the project which have the word public in their denomination. And we wanted to insist on the publicness of A, artistic creation, B, attending discourses, and C, the way the public itself is meant or expected or invited to attend or participate, hopefully. One could say that exhibition is by default a public act. There is no exhibition that is hiding itself from the public. When you exhibit, you bring something from the darkness into the light. This is a public act per se. But nevertheless, we thought that exhibitions became often static, and they became a kind of medium that does not really reflect on its own publicness, the ability, the capacity that they may have to bring the discussion, the debate into the heart of an exhibition. Therefore, we decided to stress on this public dimension of the project, and we spoke about public exhibition. Then we had public programs, then we had publications, which is again about dissemination, about distribution, and about production of knowledge. We had public education as different to more restricted formats of education. And we had the public radio, which was organized in collaboration with several existing radio stations on different continents in the world, and then converging in one public radio organized in Berlin called Savvy Radio. So this included more than 20, I think, commissions of sound works for the radio, and also special programming by each of those participating radio stations of their own program for a certain period of time prior to Documentaa, sort of in approach to or in advance of Documentaa. And then we even had public television. So television seems to be a kind of old-fashioned and slightly obsolete medium, but in Greece, in Athens, television had a certain political significance because it happened so that the public television called ERT, the National Television of Greece, was closed down some years before we started to work in Athens. So people who wanted to see the news saw just the dark screen, and television was kind of out. It sort of was declared bankrupt and closed down. Then came the new government of the party called Syriza, which is a left-wing party, and they made a kind of programmatic gesture of bringing this public television again on air, so to say. So we approached the ERT, and we proposed to have every week for 56 weeks, so pretty long time, a different broadcast on Monday night on this public television, where we programmed not the films or film works by the participants in the exhibition in Athens or Kassel, but we kind of expanded the field of the exhibition by inviting those artists who did not show their works in the physical exhibition or exhibitions in Athens and Kassel. So it kind of increased the number of participating artists quite massively, and also it made Documentaa 14 available to people outside of Athens. So this television only covers Greece, but you could watch the programming of Documentaa 14 in quite remote villages. In other cities, you did not need to necessarily come to Athens and see the exhibition to experience something of Documentaa. So it was about many dimensions possible that the exhibition may and should assume. In terms of the exhibition, it was with around 160 living artists invited to participate, and countless historical artists, whereupon those invited to participate were commissioned mostly new works. So we had to, within 3 years, realize more than 200, I think, entirely new works or bodies of work for the exhibition. And Ahlam's work, and especially the one that you showed in Kassel, is one of these commissions of Documentaa 14. So here you have the Athens venues as well. As I said before, mostly public institutions, not several existing private foundations that are doing fairly well, since they have practically unlimited assets as compared to the collapsing public sphere in Athens and Greece. We try to organize an exhibition in both contemporary, modern 19th century and ancient locations or venues of all kinds, from small institutions to public parks, to the university, to the Agora of Athens, and so forth. So in the end, there was no one kind of parkour that we suggested to visitors. You could organize your time in Athens also according to your wish, in a way. And I believe that with exhibitions such as Documental, it is virtually impossible to, and it's also counterproductive to think that each visitor should see everything. So we try to help visitors to get rid of this neuroses of having to seek for each and every artwork in the meshwork of this enormously complex city as Athens is, as a Mediterranean metropolis, but instead to have more personal experience of just finding maybe some parts of the show and spending more time with certain artworks while possibly never reaching other artworks. So it was physically not really possible to kind of check this exhibition within even 3-day period, which is often an argument brought by the critics of these large exhibitions, that they are kind of impossible to see. But this opinion is predicated on a kind of strange expectation that you must see everything, while I believe it is also important to allow yourself to miss and perhaps to long for what you have missed as a visitor to an exhibition, especially that you were also, while visiting Athens, invited to see or experience the second take on the show, which would take place in Kassel, where occasionally you would see some of the same works that were shown in Athens, because we did not tell the artists that you must produce 2 different works. We said, it's entirely up to you whether you want to, repeat the same presentation on both locations, show 2 different works, or you may even choose to skip one or the other location and just focus on Athens or Kassel. So we had a whole variety of responses to this invitation. So different, let's say, modalities of the placement of works between the 2 cities. There was also something about the idea of time lapse between the 2 acts of the show that interested me. So usually an exhibition is a sort of unique event, and we were trying to question the event character of the project by saying that we do it and then we do it again. So it's much more similar to, for instance, an idea of a take in recording the jazz music. You have alternate takes in which there is a certain score or a certain line that you play, and sometimes those takes that were not included on the final record are of more interest than those that were included. So we very much saw Athens and Kassel as 2 alternate takes in terms of a work by the same artist that you could see on different locations. So apart from the idea of take, there was also an idea of a déjà vu, already seen. So you would visit Athens, you would see a work by an artist XYZ being a set of photographs, and then you would come to Kassel, you would see exactly the same work in a very different location. And I think that this gives a little more weight to the visitor and the kind of active role that the visitor has in shaping the exhibition in his or her own mind, the beauty in the eye of the beholder, if you like, or cruelty. So in a certain way, very often when you see a work of art, you want to revisit it again, but then it's gone because the exhibition is closed. In this case, those who managed to pay a visit to both acts of the exhibition often had a second chance, so to say, and they were challenged to maybe change their perception of one artwork that they could see the same in both locations. So sometimes they would think like, yeah, but I saw the work of, say, Ahlam Shibli already in Athens, and here it is again, but it's a different work. So there were different possibilities of organizing this tension or relationship between the work shown in 2 different places. And maybe it would be interesting now to, from exactly this discussion, to move to Ahlam's work, first in this exhibition here, and then in both parts of Dokumenta 14 in Athens and Kassel, and we can start maybe with occupation, since this is the work that addresses the displacement and its multiple issues head on. We can begin with this. So.
And the flight connection between the two cities.
Okay.
That was a special project for Dokumenta.
Yeah, I mean there were many special projects. Some of them highly problematic in terms of the let's say pollution caused. So one project that we tried to establish was a kind of air bridge between Kassel and Athens. Athens has an airport, and to this airport mostly tourists are arriving. Last year, I think around 30 million tourists visited Greece. Tourism is the only branch of economy that is, holding up still. I believe country cannot live on tourism only, and this is not a way to go on, I suppose, in long term. Still, there is an airport in Athens which is very comfortable, and many people fly to this city. There is also an airport in Kassel. It's outside of the city center. Outside of the city, you sort of drive through the fields of asparagus. So you see this asparagus growing on these fields of Germany, and then you arrive in a small airport building where there is no flights. This airport was built, but there is a kind of political controversy around the economy of the airport. They say it's useless. Some others say it could be useful in the future. Kassel is a medium-sized city in Germany. It has been very poor after the Second World War because it was located in what they called, I think, Grenzgebiet, the border area or border zone. It's just, I think, around 60 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, to what used to be the border between West Germany, where Kassel was once, and East Germany. So there's a political divide, and maybe this political divide, as reflected in the actual topography and all that comes with it. So maybe the idea of dividing the Dokumenta also comes from this notion of Kassel being a city in Germany in the border zone, and the city where the citizens of West Germany would not necessarily want to live, preferring to live in places like Hamburg or Frankfurt or some more interesting places. After the division of Germany ended, after the reunification of Germany, Kassel, one could say, lost even this problematic status of a border city. It just became a city in a sort of nondescript center, I would say kind of hollowed out center of Germany, a city without qualities in a certain way. The only quality and part of the image of the city and part of the official name being Dokumenta, because Dokumenta is what defines Kassel. But Dokumenta defines Kassel only once in 5 years, and in between the editions of the exhibition is a gap, and this gap is a place of it's a moment where the kind of unfulfilled ambitions, hopes, and sorrows of the city come very much to the fore. So it's a moment of a kind of slump or depression in the life of the city, and this is exactly why I think it is important that the work that Ahlam realized for the part of exhibition in Kassel addressed the citizens and the location. So it's the work that was realized through several months of research in and around the city of Kassel, but we'll speak about it in a while. It was called Heimat, which means the homeland, yeah, home. Right. So, okay. When I first saw images of Ahlam's occupation series, if one can say so, or the kind of body of work, body of photographs called Occupation, I had a feeling which I also had when I looked at the city of Amman today, that there's a kind of morphological affinity, very striking, between certain views of the city of Athens and also the views offered by Ahlam in these photographs taken in Hebron. And today I had it in Amman, which, as Suha Shaman told me, is on no less than 7 and maybe more hills here. So this, of course, makes it structurally similar to the city of Athens, and I have not been to Hebron, so you know more about the geography of that city. But I was kind of interested in the way the work captures a little more than this given location of Hebron, but also Pars Pro Toto speaks about a different way of thinking the city in, roughly speaking, the Mediterranean region, as compared to a kind of more planned, rational vision of the modern city as developed in the Western Europe following the sort of nascent international modernist movement. And this clash between the vernacular and local ways of building and the kind of leveling aspiration of modernism was very well seen in Greece, where in the 1930s there was a Congress of International Modern Architecture, the SIAM, organized, that ended up with signing, well, not with signing, but with something that became known as a Athens chart. And this Athens chart defined the future development of European cities according to principles that participating architects from many different European countries explained as rational. So there's kind of clash between what is simply built and what is planned. And I think that this clash and its kind of political undertones is exactly what is at the core of this investigation of Ahlam in the occupation work. And I wanted to ask you first, what would you say is special about this work and the way it looks at the location as compared to your other works? In the meantime, the city of Hebron was also declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which we consider a sort of double-bladed victory after she showed the work occupation in Athens.
Yeah, so we were lucky to announce also on the website of Doocumenta the announcement of declaring Al-Khalil as a heritage, international or world heritage that should be taken care of, and especially with the issue of Al-Khalil, Hebron, that it has 5 settlements inside the city itself. Now, with the image that we have seen before, it's a mapping of the work, and the work itself dealing with how the occupation, the Israeli, by its army and by its settlers, occupying the city and influencing the daily life and the architectural living building of the people in the city, and I choose to show the one step that happened there, which how the people surviving the city. And when I was invited to Doocumenta, I didn't have enough time, as usually I'm doing, to have a 1 year reading, research, and so I had to work with the time of doing the work and making also the study about the city. I would say the work itself, in relation to my other works, it's continuation. It's continuation of looking at what make a place a home, and what also people, what is the need to make a home or to have a home, and dealing with the trauma of being at home, because I'm sorry, but I have been dealing with traumas of home in several works of how can one be at home, and I had 10 days, which usually I will often I will need these 10 days to make a quick scan of the place where I want to work, and find my key points where I could relate, and from there planning what I want to show. With the time, I developed two things: the captions, which actually it's come out of a discussion with my colleague, artist, photographer from South Africa, with the time that they did work, and they would choose to have a captions as a political statement of what is there, referring to Santo Mufokeng, David Goldblatt, and Guy Tellem, especially because this artist, photographer, they took a position of the apartheid, and they did deal with it in their work. Santo Mufokeng is a black person. David Goldblatt and Guy Tellem, they are white persons, and during the apartheid they were active as a photographer artist. And the grouping issue, which I started mainly with the work trackers. It's our first meeting.
Yes, I mean,
that was the starting point of narrative, of sequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we have known each other. I mean, we have worked together for the first time. I think it was over 10 years ago. Or?
2005.
Oh, okay. So it was.
And the book 2006. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, but
13 years.
It took 13 years until Ahlam made a new work for an exhibition which I curated. So it's the first time with the work Heimat in Kassel where actually, I could commission a new work, because with Trackers, which is about soldiers, to say little, it was an existing work at that time.
No, I did it. It was for Kunsthalle Balsen.
Yeah, it was in the making.
Right.
In the making.
Yeah.
I did not, we did not start the conversation.
Correct.
Anyway,
it was already.
Yes. So same was the case with occupation. It was the work that was kind of there, and then with Heimat it was an entirely new work, and this gave me a very different insight into the work process of Ahlam, which has to do with investigation on many levels, which starts, I think, with conversations with people in an area. After some preliminary reading or kind of conceptualizing the scope of interest, come conversation with all kinds of, say, residents and people whom you meet or you have meetings arranged. And there you get to the point where, so let's say we are confronted with a number of pictures, and these pictures are I would say, neither completely constructed, nor they are just capturing the moment of a magical chance encounter, because there is a kind of driving interest in, for instance, identifying certain types of structures here, right, which are these structures of protection, which also turns into a kind of expression of aggression at times, both ways. But at the same time, there is a moment in which things just happen, which is then captured on picture and chosen for the final selection. So I wanted to ask you what how you go about the organization of your process of taking these photographs and then the final selection for a work.
So I need, when I'm working, I need to write what do I want to photograph, which is narrative. I write myself what are the points that I need to cover in order to build that truth that I'm going to tell you, to show you. And I almost make a sketch of how many pictures I want to show, how big the group it is, and what are the subjects or the themes inside each sequence that I'm going to show. I often try to be faithful to my thinking, because I would usually have the time to make the research, the reading, and write what are the issues that through this work I want to cover. And then I build the sequence according to the elements that I wrote, that I'm interested to deal with. I go photograph the things, but when I go there, I spend time with the people to listen first to what is the issue, and try to see what is there that translate my thinking and my ideas, and then the hard work, it will be the editing. I photograph a lot because also I don't ask people to position for the camera, and I try to give respect and not to show people in a silly way. And in this specific work, we don't have so many people because my concentration was about the physical homes of the people and how they relate or how they were affected and dealt with the trauma of the occupation. But with the work I did in Kassel, which I photographed, it was about the people, because I photographed two groups of people who arrived to Kassel and the surrounding. Kassel, it's in a region called Hessen, and these two groups of people, they arrived to Germany because of the Second World War. The first group, it's original German people who had to flee from the east side of the Oder River that separate Germany from East Europe, Czechoslovakia at this time, and Poland, and Romania, Lithuania, where German people used to live. They were asked to settle in empty areas, and partially because many supported Hitler and supported the Nazism, so they were revenge, and many also ran away, being afraid of the Red Army, of the Soviet army. And the other group, it was the Gastarbeiter. Gastarbeiter, it's the workers who were invited to come to Germany and work there, because Germany was destroyed after the Second World War. The Marshall Plan was to bring money to Germany, to rebuild Germany, which was the main idea. that America will have a base where they can have an army and be ready for the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Yes, I mean, just to interrupt for a second, of course the implications of a Marshall Plan for German economy are known, and it basically guaranteed that this economy was rebuilt and made very strong. But there are also implications for the cultural sphere, and in Documentum 14 we suggested that Documentum itself is a fruit of the Marshall Plan in the sense that it kind of coincided, being introduced in 1955, with the political climate in Germany, where there will be a need for a kind of spiritual reconstruction and bringing, the citizens together around idea of culture against the idea of the kind of barbarism of the previous period. So Documenta itself, with increasing presence of American artists in the second and third edition, up to the fourth edition of Documenta in 1968, where it was met with a dissent and criticized for the overpresence of artists supported by mostly American commercial galleries. So this is a history that is developing along the lines of larger Cold War era divisions, and Documenta is ideologically not a neutral sort of playground here, while it completely neglects in its historical development the history of people who are arriving in the city of Kassel, as you said, the first being the Gastarbeiter, and the Gastarbeiter, the guest workers, are not coincidentally the people to whom the book of John Berger, to whom this work is dedicated, the Seventh Man,
because John
is
Berger,
dedicated.
he died unfortunately while I was doing this work.
Yeah, so because you mentioned the South African photographers as inspiration, but there is also the idea of the montage of text and image that goes, let's say, into the history of the cinema.
Yeah.
I mean, you did study cinema first.
I did, yes.
So
I did in order to richness my photography. It was very much meaningful for me to study how to make films in order to know how to make a sequence photography.
yeah, so this combination of image and often still image and text is something that was very revolutionary about the work of Godard or certain films created in the 60s as a sort of follow-up on the French New Wave. But in terms of photography, the book of John Berger is kind of paradigmatic for establishing the relationship between the photographic image and the kind of narration, comment, poetic narration, matter of fact, statistical information and whatsoever that comes together with the image, against the idea that pictures should speak for themselves.
Right, and actually that was with the John Berger books. When it's a work that John Berger and John Moore they photograph and they went to Greece and to Turkey and Italy to photograph the way the voyage of the Gastarbeiter. Gastarbeiter, it's mean guest worker, but it's used as a it has a meaning to say it in German because it means a worker that they were invited to work, but the plan was that they leave after 2 years, with the idea that they leave and they will build the industry in their own home lands, which is absolutely cannot be possible because the workers will come from very poor villages.
Yeah, so it's low-paid workforce, with the idea behind that these people are anyway paid well because they are coming from places like Turkey where they are paid nothing, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So you have a kind of moral explanation of like why these people are here, but there is a kind of hardcore economy behind, which basically at some point renders these people undesirable or just useless, right?
Yes, and with John, back to John Berger, he was talking about what the people took with them in their voyage, because mostly they travel with the train. And he talked about the food and the sausage and the bread that they could carry from their homes, and this is the last things that they will taste at home. That's give me the way how to think about how to deal with the guest worker, and we often will hear that there's a integration, how the people integrated to the place where they are, but no one thinks about how the place integrates to the people. And when I ask, I sit with people and I ask them question and answer. And when I ask people, how did you find that the city integrated to you? Everybody ask me answer in the other way, as if I'm asking, what did you do to integrate to the city? Even the thinking were not an options to be exist. That the city has to integrate to these people, that they actually not only give their houses and their life and their community, but even some people lost their children there, because men or women will come to Germany and they leave behind their children in the village with their grandparents. And at least 3 families that I met, they lost their children because they were not there, and the children just with the accident lost their life, and the parents wouldn't even know about that till 2 years after, because the relatives in the village wouldn't tell them this bad news while they are working abroad. And so with the work of Heimat in Germany, there was one question of, I came with the idea that the people, these groups, they created a new home in Kassel because they didn't leave. Of course, not after 2 years, because there was the oil crisis in '78. So they had not even, they didn't go back to their homes because it's a poor country. Spain was people, they were with no shoes, hardly they could have food. And the opposite, they did bring if the husband is in Germany, will bring the wife and the children. And so there was this question of to create a home. With the German refugees, I found something very interesting.
German refugees, you mean?
The German refugees from the Second World War. For instance, this man, he came from a town in Czechia. Today Czechia, it was Czechoslovakia, which was the rich, it was kind of a rich town where he came from. And he was telling me at the moment declaring the end of the Hitler regime, and how the Czech captured the people of the town, and they put them in front of the wall, and he said that they were with the weapon in their heads to confess what they did. And he told me that the American forced them all, they gathered them all inside the church, and they forced them to watch films about what the German did, the Nazis, what they did. And now he's living in a small village very close to Kassel. And here he's showing me documents. For instance, if you see the brown things with the logo, it's his identification card from the Hitler time. So what I find that they have in Kassel and the surrounding monuments, and I asked one man why to have because I was in a celebration of putting a new monument. And I asked the man, why do you need the monument? What they give? So the man said, because we don't have in this village monument, and the other monuments are very far. But the truth, in this village, I saw three monuments. It's just a 5 minutes walking till the next monument. But there was one with talk with other man. Lighted for me the answer and give me to understand what is this monument. I knew that I wanted to photograph them because they are there, and not only they are there. In the monument, it's written from the place of the monument to the original village where these German refugees came, what is the distance? Which remind me now with one artwork here in Darat al-Funun, the artist Khalid Hurani. It's the distance to Jerusalem. But in this monument, it's the distance between the monument and the village. And so one other man, he told me, I asked, what do you feel the difference between you and the German who are in Kassel? And he said, the painful things that the German who are living here always, they have a furniture from their grandparents. And we, who came, the refugees, we don't have a furniture. Now, the refugees, they were allowed to take 30 kilo with them. And mostly during the war, they were not allowed more than 15 kilo. And only if you are you were a communist or activist against Hitler, you will be allowed to take 150 kilo. People couldn't carry so much because they fled during the winter, the snow. And there are 18 million refugees at least. Minimum 1 million died during their walk to Germany because of babies, old people didn't survive. They died in the way. And so this to say that we don't have a furniture from our parents, that opened for me to see the things that it's talking about roots, about belonging. If I don't have a furniture from my parents, so I need to create furniture. It's also talking about history. If I don't have it, I need to create belonging and history to the place. And how I could do it? The monuments, they are talking about my story. So I will be belonging to this village if I have something that shows this is my story, and my story, it's part of the narrative of this village. And so that's about the refugees. The things about the Gastarbeiter, which they come mostly from, the first they come from Greece, Italy, at that time Yugoslavia, Spain, a little bit from Portugal. And the last one who joined, they were the Turkish, because Germany didn't want workers from Turkey because they didn't want Muslim in Germany. But since Turkey had a good relation with America, and America could influence Germany, and this is why only the last group of people who came, they were the Turkish. And so my focus with the group of the workers, the workers guests, is to see how they created a home. And back to John Berger talking about the food, that this is the taste of the home, and this why. They created shops that will bring food that connect them from home. And this way we see also a lot of Turkish restaurants at that time in Germany. Also, this relation of bringing my own culture to be part of the place, and then the place will integrate to me, and so on.
Yes. Well, I think also it was important that this work created a kind of bridge between the Nazi era, after which, when it ended, the Sudetendeutsch and those Germans who were living in the area of Sudeten Mountains, which is now mostly in Czechia, came to Kassel and to other places in Germany, and later subsequent, let's say, waves, if you like to use this kind of metaphor, of Gastarbeiter, or recent arrivals of refugees from Syria and elsewhere, who are also in Kassel. So this is actually the newest after the Turkish. It's the new ethnicities that find a home, perhaps, or not find a home in Kassel. Although you made this distinction, I know that the distinction is between those who were invited to Germany as guest workers, right? And those
yes,
who were.
but there is a camp, a refugee camp, that was for the German after the Second World War, and now it's for the refugees from Syria and Afghanistan, the Friedland camp.
Yeah, but I wanted to speak about the kind of shifting status of a Gastarbeiter or guest worker, the kind of invited stranger who can be also disinvited. So it's always this relative position in the city of Kassel. Beginning with this photograph, in which you. This is for the local elections, and you have a candidate from the Kassel left-wing party who is coming from the Turkish minority. But we have to remember at the same time that Kassel is a place of political murder, which happened 10 years ago, which I think your work is not addressing directly.
Right. I should have the image here. The monument for the murder.
Okay. So it is addressing it directly. What I'm talking about is the assassination of a Turkish young guy who was an owner of the internet cafe in Kassel. His name was Halit Yozgat, and he was shot dead in this cafe by members of a kind of neo-Nazi terrorist organization called the National Socialist Underground, which organization over several years committed 10 murders all over Germany, and those targeted were in many cases second generation or first generation immigrants from places like Turkey, also Greek person and so forth. So in 2008,
he was murdered 2006, and they start the trial or investigation in 2012. They opened the trial in 2013.
okay.
And it start all the murders start in 2000. So it took 11,000 to recognize that it's the neo-Nazis act of murder, and not as the police were saying that it's the family killed. The police said at the beginning it's the family killed this person, or he was a criminal or using drugs, etc. Only after 11 years, there was after actually the killing of Khalid in Kassel in 2006.
Yeah, so it was organized crime, and this assassination gave also rise to many debates in Kassel, and one of these debates is about the commemoration of Halit Yozgat. So the family of Khalid Yozgat wanted the street at which his internet cafe was located, which is called Holländische Straße, and this is a historical name related probably to Dutch settlers who came to Kassel at a certain point many, I think 3 centuries ago. And it's a big street, and the city refused to rename the street into Khalidstraße, and instead they offered a kind of compromise solution. They named a place nearby this cafe. This is the place that Ahlam photographed here, Khalid Platz, the Khalid Square, and there is a tram stop called Khalid Square. So when you take a tram, you hear from the speaker Khalid Platz. So the tram stops there, but it's not and plus it's a location in front of the Protestant cemetery of Kassel, which is not particularly, let's say, well chosen as a place of commemoration. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. But there is ongoing debate concerning both the local commemoration of this murder, and it was against a larger background of the trial of the one remaining member of the National Socialist Underground, Beate Schappe, who was on trial pretty much during the preparations to Dokumenta. So these discussions were particularly current in Kassel, and I think that this is how your work also, reaches into the present and perhaps also draws some trajectories for the future.
Let me just say one thing about why I decided to photograph in this way. The monument has on top plate where it has all the names of the people who were murdered by the NSO. But no one can read the plate. You cannot read, you cannot touch it. And also there's these flowers that block even if you try. So there is in one hand position or trying to include the story of the victims from the Gastarbeiter, but on the other hand, you cannot access it. And this monument was made by the municipality of Kassel and the other cities that they had also from the victims of the NSO, and they were so it's the monument was not even a discussion with the families how to create the monument and in which way to present the names. It's just the decision of the city.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch why we can't read the plate. Why it's not readable? Why it's not?
Because you cannot read it, it's from the top. Usually when you have a monument, the text will be in the front, so you read it.
So in a
and
way,
here you need to come and...
The form of monument is such that it's a little bit like a gravestone inscription with very tiny letters. You really, when you look at this very unassuming pedestal from, for instance, the tram stop 30 meters away, you don't feel in any way attracted to go and check out what it is. It's just boring,
Yeah.
And when you walk up to the monument, you have to read all the names of victims. You have to figure out that one of them was Khalid Yozgat, who was killed just 100 meters away. But at that place where he was killed, there is nothing. The place was turned, after it was his internet cafe, it was then turned into kind of second-hand audio-video shady shop-like business, which then closed down, and there is absolutely no visible mark that would really address people at large. So you have to kind of know to get there.
Yes.
And of course, local people, they do know, and people from different ethnicities who are in Kassel did organize partly legal, partly illegal events like commemoration and so forth. But this is the official monument. This is the kind of minimum that the city allowed in terms of how important it is to commemorate this death in public space.
And the family, they don't. Most of the family they don't come to this monument because they don't feel it's present their wish of memorializing their sons.
Okay.
I think it's time to let you ask. Sorry, we took a lot of time from your time, but do you think it's okay?
Yeah, I think we should open for some questions. So.
Yeah, more than
Discussion.
welcome. To ask or to add in a note, comment.
Did you realize any difference in when you got the Nebendeutsch and the Gastarbeiter and how open they were to your work and to you photographer them?
We made after the opening. When I opened the exhibition, I invited the people I photograph. We made for them a tour to see the exhibition. And actually, Adam, you remember, I asked for 100 free tickets to Doocumenta. Luckily, I received 100 from Doocumenta, 100 tickets to offer the people. So I'm answering in another way your question, because the interesting things, it was after when I had the exhibition, because I told the people I'm going to I'm working at these two groups and I will show it together. So there was no question, everybody agrees. But when the people came to the exhibition, the German refugees, some of the German refugees who I photographed, they were shocked to see that these two groups are now together. So that I told, and I explained what I'm doing, which I always do it. But like even to show that I had one sequence that it has the both two groups together, and one man, he refused to see that they are together. It's us, not the guest Arbeiter. And when I said, no, this is a guest worker from Spain, and he couldn't believe it. Like, no, it cannot be. And then when I, at the end of the exhibition, we made Doocumenta was large enough with me, so allowed me to cook for the people I photograph and to bring them for a dinner to say thank you and goodbye. And I had to insist with the German people, yes, please come, because the dinner was at the football club of the Turkish. This is the Spanish actually. With the Iraqi, the celebration. Here, this is the Turkish, the Bosphorus club for the football. It's the Turkish football club in Kassel. And they were large and they offer us the place for free. One man from the club made for us a DJ. And the club itself offered us raki. And I cooked, and I had to insist for the German, yes, to come. This club is in the north side of the city, because usually the north side it's the rich city, the rich side of the city, but in Kassel it's the opposite. The Northstadt, it's the north side of the city. It's where mostly the guest worker will live. So I had to insist, please come, and it's very meaningful. And not everybody came, and I was quite happy to see at least few did come and accept to be in the same place with the guest Arbeiter. And when during the exhibition, they were telling me, but we are German, we are different. And I said, but I'm dealing with people who came to Kassel and who create home, also the guest worker. During making the photos, I think the most important things for people, it's that their story can be, there's somebody hearing and listening to their story and present the story. And that's make people would accept to be at all photographed and shown at Doocumenta. And Doocumenta is very much respected by the local people. So they were actually for that guest worker, they were very happy to be included in Doocumenta. That was so much meaning for them, and also to visit, because almost everybody was first time that entered the gate of Doocumenta, because the ticket is not cheap. I think, I don't know even, it's not cheap, but they were invited, they were included, and not only by me, and many artists did work in the, many artists did work about the different communities in Kassel and include them in the work or exhibit in the north side of the city.
I have a question, and it's about Doocumenta Athens. I think you mentioned just a few minutes ago, you mentioned the rejection of American artists in Kassel by the resident at some point?
No, it's a misunderstanding. I meant that more and more American artists were included in the first 3 or 4 editions of Doocumenta.
Yes.
And in 1968, there was a kind of backlash where some artists coming from other European countries like France and so forth felt that they were completely sidelined by being allocated smaller spaces, having less means for production, and the superstars were people like Robert Rauschenberg and other artists who were, heavily sponsored by either U.S. commercial galleries or some, organizations in the U.S. So it kind of coincided with the general social unrest in 1968. So that was the moment where there was a kind of reality check done on what is the role of this Doocumenta in Kassel. And then came 72 Doocumenta of Harald Zeeman with a completely different formula. So this idea of linear narration of post-war modern art history with the kind of loss of the importance of Paris to New York, kind of let's say a total appreciation of American art up to the year 1968 gave way to kind of more pluralistic, so to say, view.
My question is, in Athens, what did you think about the emerging movement of street art and local artists that came against the present, or that was against Doocumenta this year, last year?
It was kind of expected that there would be a lot of negative reaction on the against Doocumenta coming to Athens, first because it's coming, second because it's big, it's loaded with money, it's German, it represents everything that that many people, many Greek citizens would reject at this point, or they would have a problem with it. But I think we were. First of all, it was an international team in which there were many Greek actors involved. So on each level of the organization in Kassel, there were so many Greek people working with us. Second, I didn't feel particularly representing Germany, or I was invited as a Polish-born curator to do the biggest show in Germany, and I took this show out of Germany, creating a little problem. So this show had problems on all sides. So it was, as I said before, first rejected in Germany and considered from the very beginning like super problematic, because like why go to this and what to learn from Athens, which was also kind of saying that the symbolic cradle of Western European culture is very often found in Athens, Athenian democracy, Greek philosophy, and so on. So there is this ancient past, and then there is a huge gap, and then we land on beautiful Greek islands as tourists from Germany and elsewhere. And between that, there is not much. There is not much interest in understanding like how Greece arrived at its current state. So I think the project has to be seen larger than just in a sort of antagonism between the grassroots movements in Athens and the German establishment of official culture, if you like to label it this way. I think we did enough to prove practically that we weren't that, or we tried to sort of change the status, our status as Dokumenta in Athens in such a way that it became kind of, I don't know, more responsive to the local situation and its sensibilities. But definitely Dokumenta was not meant to be a showcase for Greek contemporary artists. This was of course not a declared goal of the project, because anyone can ask Dokumenta anything, and people from another country who are not included in the exhibition could say, like, why the artists from that country are not part of the exhibition. I could say that we did include Greek artists, but I find it a weak argument, and I don't like using this kind of nationalist thinking in terms of, like, how do you justify what you are doing? We didn't do a Dokumenta in order to further enhance the presence of fantastic Greek artists in the international art world. We did it in order to ignore or change these ways of looking at things. And I think the exaggerated gesture of bringing almost 60% of the collection of the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens into the symbolic heart of Dokumenta, Muzeum Fridericianum in Kassel, was exactly showing the absurdity of these preconceived ideas of, like, what should be shown where. So the museum, which is a national museum of contemporary art in Greece, cannot show its collections in its building in Athens because there is no money, and I don't know, there is a kind of organizational failure. There is a failure of the authorities to make it happen, and there is simply no money. Okay, so in Kassel there is a Fridericianum that normally is like a curatorial statement that is supposed to tell you something about what's the idea of this exhibition, and this statement is in a way replaced by an exhibition that is delegated to the curators of the National Museum of Art in Athens, who are invited to present their collection. And then again the disappointment, because, like, why is this collection here, and why is it shown this way? It is not part of Dokumenta, what is it, and so forth. So yes, there were many critiques, and they were expected.
Of course, I was just asking to see how you approach this. Thank you.
Yes.
سؤال كيف عايشتي، كيف انعكست عليك التجربتين بالخليل وبكسل؟ يعني انه كيف اثرت هاي التجربه بالخليل على تجربه بكاسل؟
You allowed me to answer in English so everybody can understand. The question was how my experience in these two places affected or influenced me. Usually, I would take it influence my working and thinking. There's, which we discussed earlier, I usually my work is dealing with the Palestinian issue, with the home. I'm dealing with the issue of home, I assume, because I'm Palestinian and we are fighting for our home. There's something back to cinema. I like very much the Iranian films, especially the films of Abbas Kiarostami, because of how much the Iranian films dealing specifically with a specific place that is their place. And so this make it the distance make the distance very close. When I work in Al Khalil, it's a place that I know, it's my people, and the very important things for me when going to work in Kassel, it's not only to look at Kassel, but also to look at my issue from a distance, and that distance make my way of looking at how I want to deal with my Palestinian issue in a much close way that let me be able to see and criticize what I'm seeing. So if I take the issue of Al-Khalil, and the issue on Khalil, which continuing one issue I photographed in Nablus, it's about the Palestinian martyrs and martyrdom operators. It's how we as Palestinians are dealing with our question about home. What are we doing for the home? So with Al-Khalil, with Hebrew in the work, I was curious to see how the people, for instance, if we look at this picture or this picture right here, it's the Palestinian, this is a Palestinian school, and that the school chose to cover the stairs, the exit from the school, using the same, physically the same material that the Israeli army using in the glasses of their cars. The Israeli army and the police, they protect the glass of their cars with a net to protect it from the stones of the Palestinian children. And now the entrance of the school, okay, when you read the caption you hear, you will reveal much more than what I'm just telling you about the reason, because the settlers attacking the children of when they come out of the school. So the net, they created the school, the net, in order to protect the children from the stones of the settlers, waiting till there's international observers that they come and they take the children out of the school. And now with this picture, for instance, here, if you look at it, it has a shadow that look like the cubes of the picture all the way there. The cubes are put in there by the Israeli army because the shadow in front of the three children, it's the shadow of the biggest checkpoint in Al-Khalil. And of course, I was not interested to show the checkpoint, but the shadow, yes, and the cube behind, because I wanted to relate with the idea what I came to with this work. So there's plenty of shapes you can create in order to have a shadow for the terrace of your salon. But now to choose the same element that create a shadow that remind with that cubes of the checkpoints there, my assumption that this is how one can survive the trauma of passing this checkpoint every day to go to work, to school, to go to buy bread, to go to see your mother that she's ill, to go to see your friend, to go see your lover, whatever. You need to pass the checkpoints. There's every 20 meters in the old city of Al-Khalil a checkpoint because of these 5 settlements inside the city. So, to be able to see this and to talk about it, first of all, my work is to, first of all, for me to look at and to see it, but also for my people, I think this it's developing also because I'm taking this step outside of Palestine and look at this, at what create a home and deal, going back to Palestine and deal with this issue. Did I answer you?
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I happen to have lived the whole last year over there in Athens during this during the documentary. Saw the exhibition there, and I was thinking now when you're in your talk, the relationship between home and occupation in both situations, almost rather inversely, when we see all this in Khalil's side, Israelis coming there, occupying in this specific town, and in the other side, a rather somehow loosen up cultural occupation of the city of Athens, and how they almost this, to think about this inversion of this, the one being a bellic situation, and in the other one being a more loosen up, rather masked. Or I'm not saying that that was a project, rather, by no means, but to reflect on that, especially, which was a constantly brought up theme in the parliament of the bodies, with the constant absence of Greeks, and the Greeks which were working there at the, friends of mine working there at the Documental with you as well, of so sometimes not wanting to be there but having to be there, rather in regards to the 50% of unemployment rate. So how those things works, right? Going there and understanding those almost in an opposite way. I think it's really interesting to think about what we're seeing, what Ahlam said about home occupation, and in the other way, like arriving in Greece, making the banquet, and having almost no Greek participating on the banquet. So, yeah, to reflect on that.
Having almost no Greeks participating in what?
The banquet, feast, right?
Well, I don't think it was a banquet, and I think there were many participants, both artists and among the organizers, who were Greek. One example of how we try to deal with kind of real issues of the place that have to do with unemployment and a kind of possibility of exploitation of low-paid workers was when around a month prior to Documentta, there was I heard that the exhibition guards were hired to guard or to be in all the venues of the exhibition are having an issue with a contract that was offered to them, and especially with the fact that Documentta, having no legal capacity to sign contracts in Greece, had to go through the kind of company that hires workforce called whatever, and we were told that this contract should change, that the workers requested some change of conditions and a little bit more money or more money. So at that point I had to, I was in a role of someone who to these people represents the institution of Documentta, because I was the artistic director or some kind of director, so they saw me as someone representing rather the other side, while basically I was the person who had to negotiate it with both, with the workers and with Documentta in Kassel, in order to make sure that there is a fair deal offered. And we redrafted the contract after I met all these people in 2 meetings that we agreed upon, so that there were about 150 of the future exhibition attendants showing up and kind of speaking about their issues, which mostly come also from their previous experience being paid not enough or being offered no contracts while working and so forth. So there's a very bad experience that they had in the past, and they thought that this is now going to be reproduced under the banner of all these ideals that Documentta wanted to stand for during the process in Athens. So there was an actual test, which was that this new contract was offered to the exhibition guards, and we asked them to sign it, and everyone signed it, save maybe for 1 or 2 persons who, I don't know, they just didn't show up. So this means that there is a possibility of changing through negotiation and through just changing the conditions, and you can talk about these things. It doesn't have to be always just black and white, either unfair working conditions or a kind of general strike. We try to engage in in a dialogue, in conversation, and try to understand as much from the situation there in Athens as possible. And of course, we made plenty of mistakes, most likely. But I think in many cases we also achieved a result that was somehow good for all parties involved. And for me, this was as important as presentation of the artistic content and the whole course of events after the exhibition opened. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much.
So thank you. Thanks for your listening and your time and your interest. Thank you very much, Adam.